Hello, fire goddesses, and welcome to episode 81. In today's episode, I am going to dive into boundaries. And this is part of the relationship series, part 2 of the relationship series. And as you probably already know, boundaries are something that are very, very important if you are in relationship with any other human being. Having healthy boundaries can result in having a better life, having more happiness, having more fulfillment, and most of all, having incredible relationships with those you care about. Especially now as we're going into the holiday season, people are gathering more and more, and I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, "Oh my gosh, I am about to go see my mother-in-law or my mom or my sister, my uncle, and I'm really just not looking forward to this exchange." And if you start to ask the questions, well, what is causing you to not look forward to this exchange or seeing this person? Most likely it comes down to a boundary issue. It comes down to an old pattern of allowing somebody else to treat you a certain way, in a way that they're used to treating you, and as a result of you allowing them to treat you that way. So I want to dive in. I'm really excited. This should be a pretty short episode, but who knows? Because once I start talking, sometimes I get really into it, but my goal is to keep this pretty short and to the point and deliver to you a whole lot of value to help you have the best boundaries in your relationships. So, fire goddesses, stay tuned. Hello, fire goddesses. So excited to be talking about this topic today. Boundaries is, I would say, one of my favorite topics of conversation. It is something that I love, and probably I love it so much because I personally feel that it is one of the most important skills, and I'm talking about a life skill, okay? Maybe not life or death, but when it comes to having quality relationships and having the fire that you desire, the financial abundance, the inner peace, the radiant health, and the energy balance, boundaries often play such an important component in having that fire in our life that we desire. So I want to talk about that a little bit today because, as I mentioned in the intro, we're going into the holiday season, and for many of you, you've already celebrated Thanksgiving. I'm recording this in early December of 2021, and a lot of people are getting ready to see their family for Christmas or whatever holiday it is that you celebrate. And for some people, they feel dread in seeing people because they do not want to have undesirable or unsavory exchanges with certain people. And I'm here to let you know that all of those exchanges are unnecessary. And I'm talking about exchanges that are negative or maybe unpleasant. Those are all unnecessary. They are optional. And I would say before I talk about having healthy boundaries, there's two things that I want to chat about before I go into the steps and how to maintain healthy boundaries. The first thing, and it's really, I'd say, foundational when it comes to having healthy boundaries. The first thing that you must have in order to really hold healthy boundaries with other people is that you need to have a very strong self-love practice. So whether you call it self-care or a self-worth, they're all kind of interrelated. They are different. Self-care is a practice or a set of practices that happen as a result of you loving yourself, and self-worth is the foundation to self-love. Does that make sense? So for people who, if you do not value yourself, if you do not worthy yourself, if you don't feel that you are deserving of certain things out of life, that means that you have a low self worth. So we need to really form those building blocks first, because as you will discover as you listen to the rest of this episode, if you don't have these foundations in place, it becomes very difficult to uphold those boundaries. So let's just do a really quick example. Say that you are trying to set a boundary with your mom. Your mom has this habit of calling you 10 times a day and sending you multiple texts a day where she expects you to respond right away. And if you don't respond right away, she gets angry, she becomes contentious with you, she may start to get really toxic with her comments. And often it leaves you feeling resentful, angry, and what is happening is that it's stealing your inner peace. If you do not love yourself, if you don't have an active self-love practice, what's going to happen is you could set that boundary, and it becomes really, really easy over time for that boundary to be broken if you do not have a really strong sense of self-love and self-worth. Does that make sense? So say you ask your mom to please stop calling you 10 times a day because, for whatever the reason is. It's interfering with your job, it's interfering with your inner peace, whatever reasoning that you have for not wanting her to call you or text you that many times a day. When somebody is treating you in a way that you don't like, the reason why they are treating you the way that they are, and this is where it becomes kind of a difficult pill to swallow. The reason why is because you have taught them how to treat you. So if you teach people how to treat you with disrespect, if you teach people how to break down your boundaries after you set them, what you are essentially saying is that you don't have a strong sense of self-love. And when you really build that self-love, self-worth muscle through your self-care practices, it becomes easier and easier actually to set those boundaries, and not just set those boundaries, but to set them in a confident, calm manner. Because here's one thing about boundaries, and this was something that one of my mentors said to me in my beginning stages of learning how to set boundaries. She said, when you set boundaries, it does not need to be, nor should it be, anything other than calm and peaceful and coming from a place of personal power. And I think where a lot of people get held up in setting boundaries is they feel that it has to be this really difficult conversation where it could get contentious and there could be arguing and back and forth and back and forth. But really, setting a boundary is just a matter of saying, Mom, for example, please don't do this anymore. And I think when we get hung up a lot of times is that we feel that we need to give a reason. Mom, please don't call me 10 times a day because. But really, you absolutely do not owe anybody an explanation. But if you want to give an explanation, you can give an explanation. Like you could say, well, please don't call me 10 times a day because I feel that we could get everything that we need to talk about in one conversation, and I'm busy throughout the day. I'm busy taking care of the kids and I have other things going on, and when you call me 10 times a day, I feel that you aren't respecting my boundaries. But if you aren't fully in love with yourself, and I'm not talking about being full of yourself, I'm talking about you're somebody who really truly loves yourself, when your mom comes back and tries to violate that boundary, because you need to, again, teach people how to treat you, and sometimes it takes a few attempts. When your mom attempts to go back to her old behavior, it will be easier for you to uphold that boundary if you are in an active self-love and self-care practice. So just as a recap, when you set a boundary, when you decide that you are ready to really start setting boundaries with other people and with yourself, which is something that I'm going to talk about later, having that strong foundation of self-love, self-worth through self-care practices is absolutely vital to do. And I'm taking some notes here because I feel that a separate episode about self-love and self-care practices might be something on the horizon for the future. So if you're listening and that resonates, like, yeah, I want to know more about this, please message me on Instagram at I am Angela Noel and let me know that you want to hear more about that. So the second thing that needs to happen when you're setting boundaries with other people and setting boundaries with yourself is that you need to start taking personal responsibility for your life. Because here's why. When you are not taking personal responsibility for your life, you are somebody who tends to blame everything that's going wrong in your life on other people. So going back to that boundary with your mother who's calling you all the time, if you are noticing that you are saying things like, my mom doesn't respect me, my mom doesn't care about what I want, my mom doesn't love me, or anything where you're saying, you're basically projecting your frustration about the violation of the boundary on somebody else, what you are doing is you are not taking personal responsibility for your life, and instead you are choosing to be a martyr or a victim in your life. And when you are a martyr or a victim in your life, what you are essentially doing is giving away your personal power. And at that point, it becomes very difficult to set healthy boundaries. It becomes really difficult to work from a place of personal power. Because when you are constantly blaming other people, it becomes really hard to move through that powerfully, right? So for some people who say that boundaries are really difficult for them to set because they always end up feeling angry at that person, it becomes really difficult to have that conversation. So when you work from a place of personal power, when it comes to setting boundaries, what I'm essentially saying is that it becomes a lot easier to work from that place instead of working from a place of not having no personal power. And as a result, you end up feeling maybe stressed out. Perhaps you feel like the conversation on boundary setting is going to end up in an argument. So when you work from a place of personal power and personal responsibility, what you are essentially doing is taking full responsibility for your part in the relationship and approaching it from a powerful place. So I want to segue and talk a little bit about what boundaries are, because a lot of time when I'm in conversation with my friends or even with my clients, when they're talking about setting boundaries, oftentimes it's kind of an uncomfortable thing to do. Because oftentimes we think of setting boundaries as something that's outside of ourselves. In other words, we're setting boundaries with other people, and that is the only way to set boundaries. But really, what needs to happen first, in addition to the other two things I spoke about, is that you need to be in the habit of setting boundaries with yourself first. And that's a difficult pill for people to understand, because we tend to live in culture where, I didn't learn about personal responsibility. I didn't learn about self-love. I didn't know that I was responsible for my life until much later in my life, because we tend to dramatize things. That's what we see on TV. That's what we learn, is that it's not our fault that things are happening to us. It's somebody else's fault. Right? And as long as you're continuing to point the finger at somebody else, nothing ever gets accomplished. So when you take responsibility for setting your boundaries first with yourself, trust me, it becomes a lot easier to set boundaries with other people. So an example of setting a boundary with yourself is saying that you are no longer going to talk about your personal life on social media. And lo and behold, you go on Instagram and you see that 10 other people that you know are talking about their personal life on social media, and you feel that temptation to start talking about your personal life on social media because you believe that that's kind of the thing that other people are doing to get externally validated. And you start talking about your personal life on social media. And then after you do it, you're noticing yourself feeling a little icky. Well, what's happening there? What's that ickiness? That ickiness is your higher self saying, you violated me again. You set a boundary to not do that anymore, and yet you did it again. So boundaries really are about loving yourself so much that you set boundaries with yourself and it becomes an unbreakable standard for you. Another example with setting a boundary with yourself is you set a boundary with yourself to stop working at 5 p.m. every day. Now, when you set a boundary with yourself to stop working at 5 p.m., it becomes a lot easier to not answer those text messages after 5 p.m. because you've already set that boundary up with yourself. So you don't even need to go to that person after 5 p.m. and say, hey, listen, I don't take text messages after 5 p.m. because you've already set that boundary with yourself. Now, if you want, if other people, if clients or whoever, if they're used to texting you after 5 p.m. and you've set this boundary with yourself, you might want to tell them, hey, either have an autoresponder or let them know, hey, I'm no longer texting people after 5 p.m. I'm going to use that time to spend with my family. And that way people don't think that you're ghosting them or being irresponsible when it comes to responding to them. So another example of setting boundaries with yourself first is, say you want to release weight. You want to release 20 pounds. You want to get healthy. One example of setting a boundary with yourself in order to do that is by setting a boundary that you are no longer going to consume sweets, either for a set amount of time or you're not going to do it for the time being, or some people quit sugar and never go back to it. So that would be an example of a boundary that you set with yourself. So then what would happen is if you go to, say you go to your company's holiday party or you go to your partner's holiday party and they're giving out cake and there are people that are asking you if you want cake, or maybe there's like somebody at the party who's used to eating cake with you, who knows that you normally like cake and that's something that you do together, and every time you get together once a year for this gathering, you eat cake together. So when you set that boundary with yourself first, it becomes a lot easier to set that boundary with the other person. So you set that boundary saying, I am no longer a person who eats cake. And then when you go to the holiday party and that person is trying to push the cake on you, you say, it's really, really easy to just say, no, thank you. I no longer eat cake. So what I just talked about are basically, I know I said originally it's 2 foundational items, but it's actually 3 foundational items that you need to do in order to form healthy boundaries and stick with your healthy boundaries with other people. So to recap, it's having a strong foundation of your self-love and your self-worth. It's taking personal responsibility for your life and choosing to not go into victim mentality. And 3, it's starting with forming healthy boundaries with yourself first. Now, the next part I'm going to talk about is forming boundaries with other people. So what you want to do with forming boundaries with other people is decide that it is going to be easy to set boundaries with other people. And trust me, when you have those other 3 components in place, it is easier. If you're going into this kind of green and you're not really used to setting boundaries, maybe it will be a little more difficult to do this with other people. And I think that's where a lot of people get caught up with setting boundaries, is that they think that setting boundaries is something that's got to be difficult, or is something that becomes stressful, or it's going to lead in a fight or an argument, or many people fear that if they start setting boundaries with other people, that other people are not going to talk to them anymore, and that makes them uncomfortable. And a lot of these come from people-pleasing habits and people-pleasing behaviors that for so many women especially, but men too, so many people believe that we need to be like this nice person, and that when we set boundaries, it means that we're not a nice person, And as a result, that other person may not like us or will reject us or may not want to talk to us. And I think that's where a lot of people get kind of entangled. So when you set boundaries with other people, the first thing that you want to do is choose for it to be easy. So maybe it's you hire a hypnotist, or you do some meditations around setting boundaries, or find some good self-hypnoses on YouTube, or find a good hypnosis app around setting boundaries. Because really it is easy. Once you get into the habit of setting boundaries, it does get really easy. And you want to set boundaries from this place that's really powerful. So for example, you say, please don't bring that issue up anymore. It is not an issue that I'm comfortable discussing. Or if somebody constantly, I know this is something that happens in my family, is it's very normal actually for women to talk about their weight and actually project their insecurities around weight onto the other person. So it could be something as simple as saying, "Oh, you've lost weight," or "Oh," some kind of comment about our body. Personally, I believe we're in a time where it's no longer appropriate to talk about somebody else's body. It just isn't. It isn't. And I know that I have been in many, many situations with my extended family where I'm in conversations, or I'm hearing conversations where other people are talking about their weight, or they're making comments about my weight, and it doesn't feel good. In my opinion, it doesn't feel good to have these conversations. I don't think it's necessary. And if you're somebody that's okay with having these conversations about your weight, as long as it's coming from a healthy and self-loving place, then go at it. By all means, go at it. But I find that a lot of times these types of conversations are not always coming from a healthy place. So if somebody continuously makes comments about your body or your weight or anything that makes you feel uncomfortable, again, step 1, choose for it to be easy. Step 2, say, "I am not available anymore for you to make comments about my body." And then you walk away from the conversation. It's so powerful. And the less that you say, because I feel like a lot of times people need to explain, but actually the less that you say, the more powerful it is. The more powerful you are. And I love from one of my coaches that silence is a very powerful answer. One of my coaches says that. Silence is a very powerful response. And I just love that because I feel like it speaks volumes. Because I know that for me, I grew up believing that if I was going to set a boundary, even though I didn't totally know what a boundary was, but if I felt like I needed to have a quote unquote difficult conversation, right, where I was feeling uncomfortable about a dynamic that was happening in a relationship I was having, then I needed to just have this difficult conversation, and it was going to be hard, and it was going to be uncomfortable, and the other person was going to be mad. But once I started to come from this place of power and love and knowing and allowing for it to be easy, I just said it, and those words just floated off of my tongue. And here's another thing. Most people, when you start to set boundaries from this place, are going to respect you more as a result of doing this, and will say, "Okay, you're right," or "Fair enough. I respect you and I respect this boundary." If somebody comes back in a contentious way or in an angry way, or they're not pleased with the boundary that you set, I want to remind you that their reaction and their response is none of your business, right? If they are used to treating you a certain way and you set that boundary with the other person and they don't like it anymore, it's because they are being asked to change. And most people don't like change, right? So that reaction that they're having, that's angry or resentful or bitter, comes from that place. So when you start to understand where people are actually coming from when they react and respond in a negative way, when you understand that it's coming from the fact that human beings don't like to change, or it's coming from a trauma bond, or something from their past, it becomes a lot easier to set those boundaries. And I just want to mention one other thing that's really important, because I know that there's people that are going to hear this that maybe are in an abusive relationship where they feel that setting boundaries is just not, it's not an option for them right now. And I just want to say that I honor you and I hear you. And if you are not getting the help that you need, if you are not getting the support that you need, to take this podcast episode as an invitation to go out and ask for help. Now, I know that when people are kind of caught up in something and it's hard to ask for help, it feels really hard to do that. So my invitation to you is just to start really small. Is there one person in your life that you trust that you can ask for help? And it could be really simple by just you approaching that person and saying, I need help. You don't need to have all the right words. You don't have to have all the right things to say. It's just a matter of strengthening that muscle of asking for help and getting the help that you need, that you deserve. It is your birthright to have the support and the love that you need so that you can have the life that you want. So I just want to mention that, because I know that for some people, the idea of just setting a boundary with somebody can have really negative repercussions. But for the rest of you who are holding off on setting boundaries because you fear that you're going to upset somebody, because you're in people-pleasing patterns with other people, because you are operating from old traumas and from an old version of yourself, this is an invitation for you to consider what it is that you're afraid of, really. What is it that you're truly afraid of when it comes to setting healthy boundaries so that you can have the relationships with the people that you love and care about? And one other thing, I know from personal experience, from doing a lot of work on myself, and I'm in coaching programs with other people who say the same thing. Whereas when you start to really choose yourself and love yourself and set those boundaries, and when other people are not happy and they just can't get past that, that is an invitation to move on and let that relationship go. It might be an invitation to reevaluate the relationships that you're having, because our relationships are here to bring us joy and to enhance our lives. And our relationships are here to support us and for us to support them and to work in a loving manner. And we live in such a pivotal time right now where people are starting to realize that old way of operating from old identities and trauma bonds and past conditioning is no longer necessary, and it's totally okay to move past that and become a better version of yourself. So Fire Goddesses, I hope you found this useful. I'm at the half-hour mark. I promised that I wouldn't go too long, and I hope you found this useful in your relationships, whether it be you're establishing a relationship with yourself or you're establishing boundaries with other people. I hope you found this useful. And please connect with me on Instagram if you want to further this conversation, if you have any questions. And also, if you found this podcast or any episode useful to your life, I'm asking you to please share this podcast with those you care about. Because the more you share, the more this message gets into more ears and more hearts, and the more we can have that ripple effect to help other people live better lives, and as a result, we will change the world. Okay, until next time, take care. Hi, this is Angela Noel, and thank you so much for listening to this podcast. If you have found value in listening to this podcast, I would be so grateful if you could kindly share this podcast with those you care about. Please help me spread the word of empowerment and possibility and expansion by sharing this podcast. Or you could also leave a review on Apple Podcasts. Remember to follow me on Instagram at I am Angela Noel, or you could go to my website at www.angelanoelinternational.com to learn more about my work and to find out how you can work with me. Thank you very much.